Jesus responded, speaking again to them in parables. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding party for his son. He sent his servants to call those invited to the wedding party, but they didn't want to come. Again he sent other servants and said to them, "Tell those who have been invited, 'Look, the meal is all prepared. I've butchered the oxen and the fatted calf. Now everything's ready. Come to the wedding party.'" But they paid no attention and went away, some to their fields, others to their businesses. The rest of them grabbed his servants, abused them, and killed them. The king was angry. He sent his soldiers to destroy those murderers and set their city on fire. Then he said to his servants, "The wedding party is prepared, but those who were invited weren't worthy. Therefore go to the roads on the edge of town and invite everyone you find to the wedding party." Then those servants went to the roads and gathered everyone they found, both evil and good. The wedding party was full of guests. Now when the king came in and saw the guests, he spotted a man who wasn't wearing wedding clothes. He said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without wedding clothes?" But he was speechless. Then the king said to his servants, "Tie his hands and feet and throw him out into the farthest darkness. People there will be weeping and grinding their teeth. Many are invited, but few are chosen." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So let me ask you a question. What is your church's dress code? Do you have one? Is it official or unofficial? Do you have anything to say about it on your website? Well, maybe your family has a church dress code. I know I was expected to be in a certain level of attire when we went to church when I was growing up. Or maybe you have a dinner dress code or even a cleaning out the garage dress code, like my brother's family has. Now, I should clarify that his family's garage dress code is because his youngest daughter likes to wear a princess costume for just about every event. And while princesses certainly can clean out garages, inexpensive princess costumes can only handle so much laundering. I preached from this text from Matthew at my church in New York once, and I really wanted to title the sermon, "Yes, There is a Dress Code." The reasons for that we'll get to eventually, but I just, in the end, couldn't bring myself to do it because at that church, sermon titles were posted in big letters on a giant sign so that everyone walking up and down Madison Avenue in Manhattan could read it. And yes, there is a dress code was highly likely going to be misinterpreted. I couldn't bring myself to do it, so I changed the title that week. And Matthew, the gospel writer Matthew, if I had to guess, he would grumble at my decision. But I have mixed feelings about this story he tells. It was several months ago now, back in our pre-pandemic days. I was walking to church on a Sunday morning and I stopped at Starbucks to pick up my mobile order, something I do more than I care to admit. But that morning, something happened that had never happened before. Two of us walked up to the counter at the same time and said in unison, "Order for Jenny." Now, our name is fairly common, but it still stopped both of us in our tracks. And it stopped the barista as well. It turns out it was her first weekend on the job. Now, most of the workers at that particular Starbucks location knew me. Again, we will not go into why they knew me. And the barista looked at two identical cups that both said Jenny. She looked at the cups and she looked at us and she called for backup from the register. Now, I am certain that we could have figured it out on our own, but she was new and she was nervous. Working at the register was Alphonse. Now, he prefers to be called A. A glanced up, took one look at us, and went back to the register. "The one on your left is for Jenny the preacher," he said. "The one on your right is for Jenny the nurse." Now, if it had been any other day of the week, that might not have helped this young woman very much. But it was Sunday, and the two of us stood before her, one of us in blue scrubs and one of us in a clergy collar. "Okay then," she said, and she handed us our drinks. "Sometimes what we wear tells the world exactly who we are." Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a wedding banquet for the king's son. Invitations go out to the who's who of the community. But that invitation, I'm not sure I would have wanted to receive one. If this story means what it says, an invitation to that particular table means you might end up encountering violence and murder. You might end up seated next to the best or the worst of society. You might end up tossed out if you don't dress appropriately. And finally, not for nothing, I can't help but notice that even if you survive all of that, you still might end up going to bed hungry, because at no point in this story does the veal piccata actually make it on to a single plate. Dinner is never served. So, yes, I'd prefer to skip this one. The problem is that the king invites everyone, literally everyone. Jesus goes out of his way to make sure that those who are listening to him realize just how scandalously broad this guest list has become. After being turned down by those on the original guest list, the king sends his servants out to gather not just some others, but all others, everyone they could find, both the good and the bad. When the king wants to have a party, the king has a party. And at this party, everyone ends up worthy of an invitation. So far, so good. The wedding hall is filled with guests, and it seems that all is right again in the ancient world for exactly one half of one verse. Because as soon as the king comes in to greet his guests, brimming with pride and joy that finally there are people here to celebrate his son, as soon as he arrives, he notices a gentleman dressed, well, how shall I say this? He notices a gentleman dressed almost as if he'd walked in right off the streets, almost as if when he left the house that day, he had no idea he would end up at a royal wedding celebration. Not interested in excuses, the king simply throws him out of the party. So this might be a good moment for a brief aside. When Jesus tells a story, he's not recounting what he saw happen yesterday or the day before that. He's relaying something of what it means to live the way God intends for us to live. And there's almost always a story behind the story. In the interest of time, I'm going to tell you the short version of the story behind the story. The short version is this. We need to remember, again, that we are hearing Jesus' parable through the editorial hand of Matthew. And in Matthew's community, there were a lot of longtime believers and a good number of brand new believers. And ultimately, the issue at hand was grace. The old-timers still had the law etched on their hearts, and the new folks, well, some of them were showing up without understanding what it meant to show up. And that was causing some controversy. The community was rumbling a bit about that. That's the story behind the story. To talk about this wedding banquet is to talk about the kingdom of heaven, and to talk about the kingdom of heaven is to talk about grace. God's invitation to God's people to be at God's party. That's grace. But some of the ones who were invited were acting as if the invitation read, "Come as you are, no big deal, no fancy clothes, no etiquette, no RSVP, no problem." But there was a problem. They'd forgotten whose party it was they were attending, which meant they couldn't tell the difference between cheap grace and costly grace. Now, they wouldn't have necessarily known to call it that back then. Those terms come from Dietrich Bonhoeffer centuries later, but the idea holds no matter what you want to call it. Cheap grace expects something for nothing, sometimes everything for nothing. Costly grace knows that grace is unconditional, but it still comes with expectation. Cheap grace, Bonhoeffer says, is forgiveness without repentance, baptism without discipline, communion without confession, community without discipleship. Costly grace, he says, asks us to embrace a life of discipleship. It asks us to clothe ourselves in a new way of being. Cheap grace asks, what can I get? And costly grace asks, because I have been given so much, what can I now give? One of the sweetest weddings I ever officiated was a second marriage for the bride. Her first husband had died far too young of cancer, leaving her a single mom of a baby boy. Over time, this couple that I was marrying met, and that baby boy became a toddler and then a very opinionated 5-year-old. It was important to both the bride and the groom that Owen be involved in the ceremony. He was to serve as the ring bearer and then stand next to his mother throughout the service. We had even prepared vows that included him. For weeks leading up to the service, every Sunday, Owen would stay after worship, waiting for the sanctuary to clear out so he could practice walking up and down the long center aisle. He was beyond excited for this wedding, and he wanted to take his responsibilities very seriously. So I was surprised when just before the rehearsal, I walked in to find Owen sobbing as his mother tried to comfort him. The groom took me by the elbow, led me a few feet away, and explained the problem. You see, it turns out that sometimes 5-year-old ears don't hear the nuance of our English language. And for all these months, Owen, he didn't think he was going to be the ring bearer. He thought he was going to be the ring bear. He thought he was going to be a brown furry creature that grunts and growls as it ambles its way toward the wedding party. A ring bear. All this time, he thought he was going to get a costume. A miniature coat and tie were a miserable substitute, and Owen was inconsolable. We ran through the rehearsal as quickly as possible with a very sad boy wiping at his eyes almost the entire time. The next afternoon, I checked in with the bride and the groom, and they handed me a liturgical vestment I had not worn before. It's also one that I have not worn since. They explained to me that more than anything about this day, they wanted Owen to remember it with joy. So they said they had reached a compromise. Owen would be walking down the aisle in his proper suit and tie and bear ears, homemade, fastened to a headband. Owen was delighted with this arrangement, and he assured me very solemnly that he knew exactly when to walk down the aisle and exactly how to hand me the rings and exactly how to feel like a bear without acting like a bear. What Owen didn't know is that as soon as he took his first step into the sanctuary, the rest of the wedding party, this pastor included, would don their own pair of bear ears. And when the bride made her big appearance, she too would have bear ears worked into her hair. It wasn't proper wedding attire in the slightest, but it was the right wedding attire. I personally have never looked so ridiculous officiating a wedding, but I have never seen a little boy smile so big for so long. To some, the whole lot of us probably looked as out of place with our bear ears as the king's wedding guest looked in his shorts and sandals with his shirt tails hanging out. To assume that, however, is to miss the point entirely. You see, the king's guest, my friend Tom R. puts it this way. The king's guest isn't thrown out because he refuses to change his clothes. He's thrown out because he refuses to change his heart. Just like food is never just about food in Scripture, clothes are never just clothes. In the early church, when new converts were baptized, they put on a new garment as part of the ritual. The old attire was left behind. It was a symbol of claiming a new identity, a new life. That baptismal garment is what Paul has in mind when he writes to the church in Ephesus, "Clothe yourselves with the new self." To the Colossians, he writes, "Clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, and patience." And to the Galatians, he says, "As many of you were baptized into Christ, have clothed yourselves with Christ." To be clothed with Christ is to be ready to live as a disciple, to be prepared to truly live a life of faith. That is how one dresses at the banquet of the King. And even though this is still our rehearsal dinner, we do well to dress up even now. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a wedding banquet. It's an important story. It's a story that declares that you are loved and that the party, the feasting table, will not be the same without you. It also declares that God's love comes to us where we are, and that love, real love, never leaves us as we are. Grace, real grace, costly grace, the grace of discipleship, the grace of the cross, the grace that will lead us home. It always asks something of us. Friends, the invitation to the party, to the grand wedding banquet, the invitations have been sent out. Will you accept with pleasure, or will you decline with regret? And maybe even more importantly, what on earth are you going to wear?